Next we will review table and column aliases, and how they help us to speed up our coding by reducing the amount of typing required. A table alias is a short name or acronym that can be provided to a table, which we then use anytime we want to reference that table in our code. For example, if we had a table called dim customer, we could use the alias CUS, cus for customer. Alternatively, if you find it too difficult to come up with a new alias for a table, then my preference is to use a standard alias in the form of A for alias followed by a number. Typically I start at 10 and increment by 1 every time I add a new table to my SQL code. For example, I would have A10 followed by A11 followed by A12. I find this notation to be very clear when reviewing code. In the past I've worked with companies who would try and maintain a document of table aliases commonly used in the company, which after a period of time became difficult to maintain due to the large number of similar table aliases being used in the data warehouse, and mistakes started to creep in. For example, the table customer account relationship would have the same acronym as customer account returns, CAR. By keeping a simple notation such as A10, A11 and A12, then we don't need to worry about maintaining a document of table aliases. At best, I would always recommend that you provide a table alias with a minimum of 3 characters. While it is possible to provide an alias of a single character to a table, again this can be difficult to search for in a large piece of code if you've only referenced your table alias as a single letter, for example C for customer or XYZ. If we are doing a search for the letter C, this would obviously highlight every select statement and a number of other values in our code. Whereas if we have an alias of at least 3 characters long, this should be enough to allow for a unique search within our code. Also to note that aliases use local scope, and therefore an alias can be used multiple times throughout a section of code, but may be referencing a different table each time. For example, if I had 3 separate select statements, select from customer, select from address, and select from order, we could use a table alias of A10 for all 3 tables, and they would be unique to each select statement. Column aliases are used to change column display output for a given field. With our example below, you can see we have a simple query selecting data from the customer table, and on the right we have the displayed output as identified with a number of different column aliases. The first alias I've used here is to change the column name from first underscore name to be represented as first space name, which will be more conducive for our reporting. Next I've changed the field last name to be output in our report as surname, and for this you can see I've not used a single quote as I did with the previous column. This is because in the previous column, first name, we need to specify the value between quotes as there is a space between the 2 values. If we tried running our SQL code without quotes, it will return an error, as it cannot distinguish between the 2 values first and name, but by placing the 2 values between single quotes, the SQL engine will reference this as a single value. Next I have email, and I've changed the output here to be email underscore address. Using an underscore is an alternative to using single quotes, where I've replaced the space with an underscore value. My personal preference is to use underscore instead of spaces, as if we are reading our data into a new report such as Microsoft Excel. There are occasions where Microsoft Excel may be confused by having 2 values for a field name, but as I've used an underscore with email address alias, Microsoft Excel will read this as one word. Personal preference is to always use a delimiter which is something other than a space, such as a tab for a txt file or a comma for a CSV file. And finally I've added the value sysdate and named this as today. Sysdate is a function within MySQL which will return the current date or the system date and time. As you can see, when I executed the command, it was on the 7th of July at 2:45 p.m. This is a useful command to have if you ever need to timestamp your data with the time of execution. This is typically done when inserting a row of data into a table, and we can identify when the row was last updated or modified using the function sysdate to give us today's date. That's all for this section on table and column aliases.